What's happening with our hair today? Is it curly? Is it straight? Is it brown? Is it blonde? All of the above is the answer. Welcome back to the channel for another video, guys. So this week I am going back to regular scheduled programming, but as an aside, thank you so much for all of your amazingly supportive and encouraging comments on the last video. I read every single one, and I am always as grateful for how kind and wonderful you are, but I am never surprised. After 10 years, how could I be surprised? You are always that way. So today I'm going to be answering some of your questions that were sent across in response to a question box that I put up like 2 weeks ago. And then I ended up answering 4 questions and didn't get to the rest of them. So I obviously am not going to answer all of these, or we'll be here forever, but I will answer obviously the ones that maybe are more relevant or things I haven't been asked before. And we might change it up with some fun ones because often people will send some fun, lighter topic ones. But yeah, plenty of recovery questions. So first one, when recovered, do you ever stop doubting you were sick? I'm worried I'll never believe it was real. So in my experience, from my lived experience, if you go back and watch my early videos, I very rarely refer to my eating disorder, even though in the first video I referenced my GP. I talk about my anxiety and depression because, especially at that time, all I saw was the stereotype, and I certainly didn't look like the stereotype. So I was really uncomfortable with saying I had an eating disorder. And even my specific diagnosis I was uncomfortable with because I didn't understand anorexia binge purge subtype. I thought there was anorexia and bulimia, and I was like, so which one? And they were like, neither, it's this other one. So yeah, it was definitely a process for me. I will tell you this, when you are recovered, it doesn't really matter to you anymore. And I say that not only from my experience, but obviously with, you know, coaches who are colleagues of mine and who work for me and friends of mine who are recovered. And it just isn't really a priority to validate for yourself how sick you were, because you don't want to really live in that space anymore. But it's totally understandable when you're unwell why you're trying to constantly get clarity on where you are or the validity, big quotation marks, of your illness, because feeling not sick enough is a symptom, right? So when I was first doing coaching work and they would come to me and they would express not feeling sick enough, I would try to point to markers and indicators that they were unwell. And then I learned with time that does absolutely nothing to make somebody feel validated. It might momentarily, but kind of like how the eating disorder is validated. You're feeding the beast, because that person might then feel like they need to continue to go down those patterns and behaviors to remain valid. So the conversation I started having, which got a much more productive response, was, you're expressing a symptom to me. Feeling not sick enough is its biggest tell, because someone who doesn't feel sick enough 100% of the time has something that means that they're sick enough. But when you're recovered, you also can see kind of like the timeline of how you got to where you got to much more clearly. How your eating disorder kind of evolved, how it kind of then unfolded, and then how it was resolved sort of becomes clarified. But because you don't have that eating disorder part of your brain active anymore, it's just not a priority, because the part of you that is trying to be appeased, that like it is bad enough, is the eating disorder. So when that's resolved, you no longer have that need, if that makes sense. And I'll add to that, I think it's important to know, for me, I can't speak for everyone, I've forgotten a lot about my eating disorder. I only remember elements of it because obviously my lived experience guides some of the work that I do with clients, and I only use my lived experience as it is relevant to each client I'm working with. I don't just like share every element of it or triggering elements of it. But I've forgotten a lot. Sometimes a client will say something, I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I used to do that. So I think that can be reassuring, that that's how much it can drift out to the outer edges of your brain. How do you cope with people constantly asking your opinions on things like Sarah's Day, Bluey, etc.? I kind of did this to myself, right? But no, I absolutely don't mind people asking, because one, it gives me such a sense of relief that people can see it. Back when I was making response videos initially, some people got it and it made other people very, very, very angry. which I can understand because so many of these beliefs that we have about diet culture and our bodies is tied back to survival, belonging, acceptance. It's not just about, I like that influencer or I tried that diet and that's why you're making me angry. And I don't think that I was quite as sensitive to that as I could have been. So even though I stand behind the sentiment of a lot of my older response videos, I have taken them down because I don't like my approach. I think that the approach that I have taken in the last 3 or 4 years has been much more diplomatic and much more reflective of what my stance is now, which is that I don't think that people are genuinely just going in, rubbing their hands, being like, how can we make money off sick people? I think we see people who are disordered in certain spaces and industries who don't know how disordered their message is or how disordered their product is. It still doesn't excuse that what they're doing is exploitative, because they do have a sounding board with their audience, and especially when you see comments being deleted, and I'm not just talking about Sarah's Day, this happens all the time, you know that that feedback is there and they're just choosing at that point to ignore it. So when they first make the mistake, total empathy and understanding. When I then see people being shut down who are giving pretty reasonable, decent feedback, and then they just perpetuate the same problem, then my empathy runs out because I'm therefore more concerned about the audience who is just actively being exploited. And I think Sarah's Day falls into that as well. She's done this multiple times in multiple different areas and just refuses to reflect. Hubris and ego over humility, which we can all be guilty of. E.g. my response videos of old, lots of hubris there, lots of ego. I'm honored that people would like me to advocate for them in that way. That is one of my favorite parts of my role, is that I am trusted to do that. So no, I don't mind it at all. It's just sometimes like people will send me accounts of people who are recovering and they are potentially, you know, spreading advice or showing a demonstration which people don't agree with or think is really disordered. I have never responded to that stuff because ethically it doesn't feel right to sort of like punch down to people who are unwell. I understand why they want me to talk about it, but it would be like my position on Eugenia Cooney. I mean, some of this stuff that they're exhibiting online is because of their disorder, and their inability to maybe see it is because of their disorder, or the attention, negative or positive, that you're giving them is feeding the disorder. I will say this, because that was another question. Would you advise starting a recovery account? Do you think it would be helpful? 10 years ago, maybe. Now, no. If I had the landscape that is around now, present when I was going through recovery 10 years ago this August, never would have started a recovery account. I am sent, you know, Reddit pages of people like tearing very small recovery creators apart, like every one of their posts, and I think it's gross. I actually think it's, yeah, just a really ugly side of our community. And it also is validated for me that when I was on the receiving end of criticism like that, I thought I was making it up in my head. And then I see it from the outside and I'm like, no, you were not paranoid. Like, people are literally quite vicious and cruel at times. And I've been really lucky in terms of the timing of how my account evolved. No one was watching at the beginning, and people started watching once I was in a really, really strong place. So that's when the channel kind of grew very quickly. And I absolutely would not start an account now to document my recovery. No way, no how. What is something that is bringing you joy at the moment? I love that. So I am going to America in July to see one of my best friends, Alex, and her husband and their little boy. They were out in January and came to stay with me. And we were like, when are we going to do this next? Like, I don't want you to leave. And especially when Alex told me that she had a spare ticket to Taylor Swift, I was like, get me Qantas.com, we're going. So that is bringing me huge joy. I'm listening to the Taylor Swift Eras Tour set list. I may or may not have started a private Tumblr where I'm like reblogging all the stuff from the Eras Tour. And I hate myself as I say that out loud. But it has really just, I don't know, I just feel so happy that that's like on my calendar, because I get to be with someone I love dearly. And we actually went to the Reputation tour years ago. So it'll be very cool to go to another one, and especially like look at the production value. So many people who are not even rabid Taylor Swift. I mean, I'm not rabid. I'm a Swiftie, but I'm not that kind of Swiftie. We all know what I mean, right? People who are not fans who have gone to the show because they're going with a friend or like their partner or whatever are like, I am now a Taylor Swift fan. That was amazing. So that is bringing me a lot of joy. How to start moving away from a recovery meal plan after having it for a long time. So I am no dietitian and I'm not pretending to be, but this is part of what I help people to manage in alignment with their dietitian, that this is not like a date that comes. It's not like a Hogwarts letter. It's sort of like when people ask, like, how do you know when you're fully recovered? It's not a Hogwarts letter. It doesn't just happen one day. It's a gradual thing. This is also my position when people come to me and they're like, can you teach me intuitive eating? And I'm like, not really. We can refer back to the principles. And yeah, there's some activities in there we can try, but by virtue of recovering, intuitive eating, conscious eating, whatever you want to call it, freedom, full food freedom, whatever you want to call it, I think some of these things have been really like, you know, magnified as like this philosophy, and it's so rigid, and you know, I think we need to be a bit more flexible in some of these definitions, right? So it should be a byproduct of all the work that you're doing, working through your fear foods, working through the behavioral stuff, working through all that little bitty root system of like, can I eat around others without comparing? Can I eat spontaneously? Can somebody change a restaurant on me and I'm totally cool with it? That's all markers of like food freedom, no rules, and that could be your definition of intuitive eating, but it's not something that we just like do one day. We see people just naturally moving into a more intuitive interaction with their food. We don't then say, and now we take away your meal plan, and now you're graduating to this. It is just very, very gradual and incremental, and you just see their healthy instinct taking over. And where you might have at the beginning of your working relationship really had to navigate how they could be comfortable enough with a challenge but uncomfortable enough that we know that change is happening. Now they're saying like, oh yeah, this week I already did that. Oh no, me, I've been doing that for ages. Did I not mention that? Yeah, no, I've been incorporating like this into my snack and I love it. I do it. And you're like, there you go. We're well and truly there, right? It's not just like broken down into chapters. It kind of blends together a bit more than that. So making sure that you're moving through all your food rules, all those food fears, all the little behavioral stuff, it will just naturally show up. It will just evolve over time. On average, how long does a client's coaching journey typically take? I cannot answer questions about like averages because I don't really see clients as far as averages in any sense. I don't see them like, what's the average personality type? What's the average length of recovery? What's the average behavioral profile? Or I don't even really get into diagnosis with people because a lot of people don't have a diagnosis. And also it just doesn't tell me that much about that person. And I think it's important as a treatment team member to be someone who is not seeing them defined as a diagnosis, right? So it just varies. And it also depends on at what point you are working with somebody. Some people come to me towards the end of their recovery process. Some people come to me when they just really need to work on the body image stuff. And some people are coming to me because they're setting up an outpatient team on the other side of being inpatient or in hospital, and we're really picking up that outpatient work. If I had to give a really rough average, I'd say 1 to 2 years. But again, I've seen a lot of people for 3 to 6 months, 9 months, more than 2 years, sometimes on and off. Sometimes they go and they stay in a good place in their recovery, and then they realize, oh, I've got to do some body image stuff here and I don't really know how to navigate that, and they come back. And that's the whole point, is we meet people as individuals. We don't run a program. It's not a box ticker. And I think that's important for people to know that you're an individual, you're not a diagnosis, and you're not a timeline, right? How to cope with missing the eating disorder and the momentary sense of control and relief it gave. So I think first and foremost, we need to hold it accountable for a couple of the claims in there: control and relief. There is a difference between the feeling of being controlled and being in control, right? If you are truly in control, very often you don't feel like you're in control because you have autonomy and you have choices, and you've got to be weighing up what the pros and cons are of what you're going to do and what the outcomes are going to be. Whereas if you're controlled, you have a set path, and therefore it feels safe because you don't have options and variables that you've got to take into account. One of the biggest things that I do with my clients is to help them redefine or really hold eating disorder self accountable for some of the language that it uses. And control and relief or calm or coping are big, big claims from eating disorder self language wise. The control that you feel is more so a result of being controlled by predetermined rules and rigidities, which just make your options really clear. It's either you do it or eating disorder is going to get really angry at you. So what do you do most of the time? You do the thing that's going to, be the path of least resistance. It's not going to end up in you being punished or berated or having to just listen to all the ways that you're the worst and weak and worthless and all that kind of stuff, right? I did not mean for that to be 3 W's. But I'm a little bit pleased with the alliteration. Relief, right? If we were to have somebody come to us who we care about, who has had a rough few months or years and their body image is in the bin and life is sort of not going the way that they would like it to, and their anxiety is high and their mood is low, and they came to you and said, I really need relief and I need to find ways to cope and I'm just not managing, would you give them a list of your behaviors and how you talk to yourself as a solution? If the answer is no, then how can you define that as relief or coping or whatever it is for yourself, right? It might be numbing, it might be avoidant, but that is not the same as relief or being soothed or being calmed. So readjusting how it's using language is super important, because if we let it use language that reflects that it's got some functional role in our life, then why would we be incentivized to change it if we really believe that and don't challenge it? So I think that's the first thing. It's also that we've got to crowd it out. As a coach, I say to every client, I can't drive to your house and make you do anything, but what we are going to do is we're going to show you evidence that your eating disorder is not actually fulfilling the function that it claims to be, and then we're going to crowd it out. We're not just going to yank it away from you. No one can come and sever your eating disorder, right? Let's show you that there are functional, adaptive ways that you can actually fulfill the need that eating disorder is trying to fulfill. That's why we take a very compassionate approach with eating disorder self, because if we look at it, for most people, it's trying to perform a protective, safeguarding role, or it's trying to help us numb maybe trauma or comorbidities or whatever it might be. So there is a function it's trying to perform. First, we look for evidence as to whether or not it's doing that effectively, and then we start to experiment with tried and true evidence-based ways to crowd out those old coping mechanisms so the brain can see, oh, this is what I'm trying to do and that is actually working. So I'm going to be more incentivized with time and growing evidence that that's what I'm going to send up as a response to that distress signal, versus eating disorder, which has been so incentivized to show up when that signal goes up. So first and foremost, hold it accountable for what it actually does versus what it's claiming to be doing with some of this language, and start to be open to and curious about what role is your eating disorder self trying to fulfill. Do you have evidence that it's actually doing that? And if it's not something you'd recommend to other people, unlikely. And if you hand on heart would recommend it to other people, I would see that as a very significant, very big red flag that you need more help. Majority of people I ask that question to say absolutely not, no way. They're shaking their head before I've even finished the sentence. If you can honestly say these are not coping mechanisms for others, then you can't define it as a coping mechanism for yourself. How can I know I can truly overcome my eating disorder? I struggle to believe it. I don't think you have to believe it to start doing the work, right? I didn't believe it. I didn't even know that full recovery was possible. And look, there are so many outcomes to recovery that even if you're someone who believes that maybe harm reduction is the way to go for you, there's no shame in that. There's so many different avenues to recovery. I just ask people to keep full recovery on the table, because I think the most prohibitive element for people to access full recovery is never being told it's possible. But it doesn't mean that there's only one way to do this recovery thing, right? I've already forgotten the question because of course I have. I say to clients, and I've said it publicly many times, I did not go into recovery because I knew full recovery was possible, had never heard of it. I was told by my psychologist it was a remission thing. I did not go into recovery because I had a big why and a big clear vision of where my life was going. I did not go into recovery because I liked myself. I didn't go into recovery because I loved myself. I went into recovery because I had a mountain of evidence to say that every attempt at my eating disorder had not led me to the outcomes I really wanted, which was to be safe, calm, secure, confident, to feel like I belonged, to feel like I was valuable. Had never happened. It was batting zero for like a million different ways and approaches that I had twisted myself into because eating disorder told me that that's where it would lead me. Never did. So I only went into it because I just didn't have any strong argument for staying sick. And I still didn't believe recovery was necessarily going to work. I just knew that this hadn't worked, so I had no reason to not fully lean into this. First and foremost, just take the pressure off yourself that that's something that is a prerequisite for success or being able to make any kind of progress. Yes, of course, as your recovery evolves, and that's part of my favorite work as a coach, is helping people to start picking up on the clues of what their values are and what they're drawn to and what they enjoy and who they enjoy being with, and tapping into those value systems and finding their why as they go and finding their motivation, which isn't necessarily to say they're motivated all the time, but it is good to keep anchoring back to what we're discovering are some of those big reasons to continue and to do this work. But it's not a prerequisite. All I'm asking people to do initially is to be curious. They don't have to commit to it, believe it. I just want them to be curious, because when we're in an eating disorder headspace, we're living in like this narrow corridor of thinking. It's so limited. It's so rigid in terms of like who we are and what we're capable of and what we deserve. And so first we just got to like work on cracking open that spectrum of thinking and curiosity before we're close to committing to it. And that's why we take an incremental approach. We're just getting people more and more comfortable with exploring, building evidence, going, okay, that wasn't a disaster. All right, yeah, I'm going to use that. And then I'm going to ramp that up a bit because the evidence is showing the eating disorder is wrong. Yep, next bit. And we just keep building that assurance that we're heading in the right direction. And that, again, harking back to that previous question, what we're getting out of healthy self and recovery is meeting the needs of what we were looking for in eating disorder self all that time. So I think this is long, but I also haven't answered a ton of questions, but they were tough. They were tough questions. I haven't answered some of those before. So thank you for sending those in. I also wanted to end this video letting you know that we have something so exciting coming up in November, but I also have to tell you that just before I hit record on this camera, the thing I'm about to mention is fully booked. But I'm mentioning it because it has booked up so quickly that I know that we're going to have people super interested in coming to these long term, and that is our plan to absolutely host these retreats long term. That is what the announcement is. The very first Beyond Body retreat in Mollymook, New South Wales, Australia is going to be held in November of this year. Only 4 spaces with Holly and I as your recovery guides. I'm going to put the promo in here because it speaks for itself. If you'd like some more information, let us know. I will put the link to the page to sort of submit your query, and then you can go on the wait list. We do discovery calls with anybody who would like to come, and yeah, just make sure that it's appropriate for our attendees. They're at like a stage of recovery where they're safe and also can get the most out of it. But we also just want to make it a very, very cool experience. Movie nights, lunch out together, cooking together, workshops, like just play the promo now. So that's what I'm going to end off on. I'm going to play the promo for you. Again, if you're interested, get in touch. This won't be held again until March of 2024, but I would recommend letting us know you're interested because this is gone before I could even tell you guys about it. We did it on Instagram and those spots have filled and we're incredibly excited. It has just sparked so much like inspiration and joy, and I feel so lucky to get to do it with one of my former clients who is now one of our coaches and is just a freaking legend, such a powerful coach, and it's just so cool. It's so cool. Anyway, much love to you guys. Thank you again for being here, being amazing. I appreciate you more than I can ever tell you, and I will look forward to seeing you maybe next week. We'll see. Much love. Take care. Bye, guys.